Today we have the third lecture on the introduction to theological and religious issues. Today I will give rather difficult material. We will start a little with a continuation of the past and basically worldview foundations that are a part of the theological aspect of understanding life. Last time, I remind you, I gave the law of time. We will literally just a little bit repeat the law of time. If we draw it in a simplified way, let me remind you simply that a person, like any biological species, is a biological system and which is characterized by biologically determined cycles. You guys here, either you have children or you will be having children. Each new generation enters life with renewed potential, with updated, renewed software, so to speak, especially after there occurred a change in the ratio of reference frequencies. What we said last time, the law of time. Therefore, the natural frequency at the genetic level, or the rate of updating information at the genetic level in any biological species, including reasoning man, that is Homo sapiens, is a very serious thing. It is pretty much constant. Somewhere around once every 25 years, a new generation appears. Your children, our children, they come into life. They accumulate information based on what you put into them. This question is very serious. This is one of the most serious questions, especially how a mother prepares, not only for upbringing and birth, but for conception. If it's a harlot mother, God forbid, then this is very bad. I hardly have time to cover these issues, but they are laid out in textbooks. And once again, the site for the books is here, Vada.spb.ru. Especially the last work there, Resolutions of Problems of National Interrelations, in particular the last chapters on motherhood. If you want not to have problems with your children, these issues must be taken into account. That is, the biological component of the species Homo sapiens. It is inherited from generation to generation, not like in animals. It is transmitted not only through genetics, but also through spirituality. Therefore, we cover these questions in more detail in the course which touches on theological questions. But at the genetic level, information is updated about once every 25 years in man. A new generation appears, it enters life with a renewed potential for development. And the task of the parents, first of all the mother, the father joins later in the upbringing, is to ensure that this potential is fully realized in life. And the task of both parents, well, mothers in the first place, is to prepare not only for birth, but also for conception, to cleanse before this. Naturally, all bad habits must be eliminated far in advance before you start conceiving a child. Otherwise, you may not get what you expect. If the potential is fully realized, that is, if you prepare for it, then there will be no problems with the younger generation. This is very briefly. Updating of information in the system Homo sapiens takes place at the level of biology, at the level of genetics, once every 25 years approximately. And this frequency is constant. But humanity has created for itself, according to the given from above possibility, also culture. That is, another component in which we live is the cultural component or the social component. And it is changing, it is variable. It has this characteristic. The rate at which information is updated at the cultural level or at the social level, I gave the last time, just to repeat a little. We've not yet quite finished on this topic. These two main components are the internal intrinsic speed or frequency of the system Homo sapiens. Once every 25 years, the renewal of generations. That is the potential of your children, our children. It is higher than that of you and me. If you do not let them realize it, you get problems both with children and in society, because society consists of families, families consist of parents and children. Also in Russian, the word семья, family. Many have probably paid attention to this. Russian is a meaning-forming language, the most meaning-forming of all. Breaks down into семь, seven, я, I. Seven I. What does it mean? 7 people, no less. 2 parents on each side, that's already 6, and at least 1 child. If there is no child, then this is not a family in Russian. If you are united in a married couple and you don't have children, in Russian it's not a family. Such a family is not needed. At least 1 child. So 7, this is the minimum. Moreover, 7, the same as me. It is necessary to take your cue from the child, because he is, as it were, innocent and immaculate from birth. All original sin is crap. What they say in the church, this is not true. Original sin does not exist. The primordial soul that came into this world is not to blame for anything that past generations have done on the earth. There is no original sin on it, which the evil and ravious churches impose on everyone, morally suppressing many with it. But in the fact that each generation of primordial souls coming into the being of the earth inherits the life circumstances from past generations, some of these circumstances raising slander against the all-beneficent God are included by churches in original sin, and transfers everything to subsequent generations in the quality of a legacy that it itself added to the inherited. This is a sign of the unity and holisticness of the world. And every soul in this world has her own predestination, regardless of what exactly and in what state she inherited. God does not lay on the soul anything other than what is possible for her. The Quran says this repeatedly. Chapter 2. Mothers shall suckle their children for 2 whole years, that is, for those who wish to complete the suckling. The duty of feeding and clothing nursing mothers in a seemly manner is upon the father of the child. No one should be charged beyond his capacity. A mother should not be made to suffer because of her child, nor should he to whom the child is born be made to suffer because of his child. And on the father's heir is incumbent the like of that which was incumbent on the father. If they desire to wean the child by mutual consent and after consultation, it is no sin for them. And if ye wish to give your children out to a nurse, it is no sin for you, provide that ye pay what is due from you in kindness. Observe your duty to God, and know that God is seer of what you do. God tasketh not a soul beyond its scope, for it is only that which it hath earned, and against it only that which it hath deserved. Our Lord, condemn us not if we forget or miss the mark, Our Lord, lay not on us such a burden as thou didst lay on those before us. Our Lord, impose not on us that which we have not the strength to bear. Pardon us, absolve us, and have mercy on us, thou our protector, and give us victory over the disbelieving folk. And on the day of judgment, everyone will be asked about what the soul could have done but did not, about having done something, hindering providence out of her own self-concoction, or under the pressure of someone else's despotism, and not about what she could not do, because the genetic heritage she received, bodily and spiritual, did not allow her to do, as well as the inherited by her generation culture of the people and humanity as a whole. The fact of the matter is that feedback lines regarding humanity at the current stage of development of its civilization are closed from above by extra social power, according to the principle: if you produce freaks degenerates, although you have been given everything to, firstly, give birth to exclusively biologically full-fledged people, and secondly, to upbring them exclusively in the quality of humans, God's vicegerents on earth, then intrasocial power over you is given to your own freaks degenerates, who will disappear from society by themselves only when you yourself change your lifestyle and gain the dignity of a human in creation. From above there is provided no original sin for all born in sin, the idea of which comes from the Old Testament world about Adam and Eve. Original sinfulness, if one may say so, exists as the sins of the parents, including parents by telegony, transmitted to children, and is expressed as a consequence of the spiritual and ravious vices of the parents, which can often even be visually seen on children born as biological freaks. Hence the conclusion: if the parents, before conceiving a child, cleanse their soul and body of everything that is objectively determined from above as a sin, not according to the scriptures but according to providence, then the child will be born not burdened by the sins of the parents, and with subsequent previous upbringing, will not experience any hardships passed down from previous generations. This is the ideal towards which society should aspire. That is, the word family comes from the expression seven like me. That is, all the efforts of grandparents and parents should boil down to ensuring that the child grows up as it is given to him from above, that is, to realize his potential. This is also very briefly. On the site there is a separate work, Society, Statehood and the Family, where this question is described in detail. A separate question on family policy, on upbringing children and so forth. Therefore, the biological component of the species, Homo sapiens, is the inherent frequency of the system. One of the meanings of the life of any biological species follows logically from this: to reproduce themselves. One of the meanings of life at the biological level, at the level of biological organization set from above, is the need to reproduce ourselves. Well, it also follows from here, I may not say very pleasant things, sex just for itself is unacceptable in principle. But copulation of the sexes occurs in order for a new soul to be born, to come into the world, and that is all. This happens in all biological species except humans. In this respect, they are given freedom. Well, they use it according to their understanding or misunderstanding. The first meaning of life, this is the reproduction of ourselves. And the same meaning of life follows from the Russian word family, семья. An odd number, at least one child, otherwise this is not a family. Now it is very fashionable to marry and not have children. Well, another fashion that has come from the West, to enter into same-sex marriages. This is generally a perversion, comes from the global masters, so that there would be fewer people. Well, the second cultural component, last time I gave a global chronology and periodization. It follows from the culture in which we live. This is also a kind of environment additional to the natural environment. We live in this environment, we created it. This is such an environment that we can die in it in the near future. Right now, for example, there is a catastrophe in Japan. In general, it concerns not only the Japanese, but the radiation from Fukushima. It is carried by winds around the world. In America, this radiation is already observed, mainly in ventilation filters, in the Pacific Ocean, and so on. That is, such a culture is bad. It is destructive. Well, this is a derivative of the culture of the Bible. Why? This is easily explained in general. If to put it shortly, then when in the 16th, 17th centuries usury was allowed in Catholicism, after the collapse of Catholicism, then production workers, artisans, were forced to increase labor productivity for the sake of paying back usurers. As they say, the surplus product from their activities. If you take 100 rubles, you are forced to pay back 120 rubles in a year, 20%. It all became active somewhere in the 16th, 17th centuries. And it spurred technical progress. Every entrepreneur of that time, or an artisan, was forced to increase labor productivity through scientific achievements, or, well, somehow change the operation of his team. Well, this scientific technical progress has led to the fact that now there is production in order to suck you into buying goods. And that is where the ads and things like that came from. We have come to such an ecological disaster, global one might say. This is clearly seen very well in Japan. Nuclear power plants were built there in order to get as much cheap energy as possible. It is believed that this is not the cheapest, but one of the cheapest. The area of the country is small, hydropower is not very good, so they built nuclear power plants. Well, they built it hastily, according to the cheapest American projects, which, in general, led to this catastrophe. This is just as an example. Therefore, usury is the driving belt of scientific technical progress in order to give back the surplus which the usurer, as it were, withdraws from the producer. One had to thoughtlessly increase scientific technical progress. Now this needs to be stopped immediately. Otherwise, we fall into an ecological catastrophe. And in practice, technologies, they have developed according to this character, and they tend to infinity. Can any biological system withstand when, in order to, as we are told, in order to live comfortably, endlessly pile up on the biosphere, no matter what, some scientific achievements, moreover, both good and bad? Because there is all sorts of rubbish at the level of genetics, the same old genetically modified products. How many people know that they lead to oncology? In Europe, they are partially allowed. In America, on the contrary, they are completely allowed. For us, for the time being, not yet. And this is justified by allegedly feeding the entire population of the planet. Allegedly, plants are more resistant to all sorts of pests and diseases. Therefore, there is a kind of double morality. These are also technologies, only at the biological level, at the genetic level. There are technical points that are constantly offered to us in order to improve our lives. But in reality, as practice shows, at the level of health, the health of the population as a whole is going down.
На уровне здоровья населения, здоровье населения в целом идет вниз.
And this component, well, this is the next graph already. And it shows that the birth rate component, if we take global demographics, then the population graph and the technology growth graph, they have one and the same characteristic. This is the number of people in the world. This is time. Here too is the time and speed of technology updates, the same characteristics. That is, historically, the population growth graph and the technology growth graph, they went in parallel. This is no coincidence. In the given case, if we take morality, at least from the Quran, then this point over here is defined in the period somewhere around 1914 to 1940. Also approximately 25 years. The middle of the 20th century, the speeds became equal. From this moment on, it is objectively impossible to live in the old way. This is a kind of ambush according to the Quran, in translation, which God arranged for people to change themselves and their culture, because from that moment on, it went up sharply to infinity. It is impossible to accelerate to infinity, because it will be a breakdown of governance. At this moment, if we do not switch to another culture, we are seeing what we have now. Everyone knows about the global economic crisis. But the global economic crisis is a consequence of the global crisis or the catastrophe of culture. Because we accelerated, but we cannot govern. If you drive cars, there is a limit of speed for each car, after which the car loses control. Here it is the same thing. Mankind as a system has lost governance in the old conception or in the old culture. What is it expressed in? Will anything stop humanity objectively? Well, there is a demographic process. The number of people in the world, now, we have 2010, 7 billion. Scientists predict. So this is somewhere around 2050. Here it stops. That is, this graph is compiled at the international world level. It is widely known. And the number 2050 here. And here 9 to 13 billion. This graph was drawn up not so much theoretically, but on the basis of practice. This is the practice of population decline, first in developed countries and then in developing countries. As practice shows, the population of some European countries began to naturally decrease already in the 19th century, where technical progress came. But not only the biblical civilization is so primordial, so to speak, in culture. Part of the Buddhist culture too, Japan is the same. It began to lose its population in the second half of the 20th century. Now there is a negative growth. We also have a negative population growth. We are now balancing more on account of migration.
вторая половина
This is the
20
second half of the 20th century too,
мы прошли эту точку,
when we passed this point and did not enter another culture.
пока мы в другую культуру.
As long as we have not entered another culture, we automatically live in the culture that exists. Culture is all the information that circulates in society, but first of all, the information that guides people. Once again, we are guided by information, we are dying out, which leads us to death. If now there are less than 2.5 children on average in a family, then it will be natural to decrease without migration. Now we need somewhere around 3 children per family in our country. That is, to reproduce ourselves, this is not even enough. If a couple unites, it is not enough. But on account of the so-called developing countries, still inertia, until 2050 there will be an increase in the population of the Earth. Then stabilization and recession, when this technical progress reaches them. This means that our biological species, Homo sapiens, does not want to reproduce itself in the old culture, and technical progress is the means of stopping the reproduction of a biological species. Let's say if we take, for example, Holland, then they have already gone down like this. This is somewhere around 1910. France too. If it were not for migrants, they would have gone to zero altogether. And Africa, for example, is still going up. And on account of the addition of these graphs, inertia, in the world it turns out that it's still going up. The balance leans in the direction of increasing of the non-European population. The non-European population, by inertia, is still going up in general. But then it will still, according to prognoses, stabilize and decrease. The Europeans were the first to create this technology for themselves, plus the Japanese. In Japan, they generally work only to make their lives more convenient, surrounding themselves with robots and generally moving away from nature very far. Children are born there in big cities, and they don't know what nature is at all, and don't even know where pasta is grown. This is a joke, of course. The people of our country are closer to nature if you move away from big cities. We give birth more in the villages. It's bad in cities too. So what's the matter? That is, this is a certain mechanism that is given from above as a sign of a change in culture, which means that the biological species will die out. This culture should turn people towards nature and stop at some point in the same way. Take this process in hand, through reason. What does it mean? Then you can feed the entire population that is. This means that you need to divide all production and consumption into what is good and what is bad. This is already a theological question. Where to take it? Good and evil. How to do it? Even global governors cannot directively introduce this matter. The people will say, why should I refuse 5 cars per family? But if you say that if you don't do this, then it's all over. Imagine that all the Chinese sit in a car each, more than 2 billion. The planet will immediately end. For us, 1 car is not enough, even per person. And this is not my inventions. At the level of global governance, those who to this day are engaged, despite the crisis, in completing globalization not in a Russian way, but in their own way. The world behind the scenes, the world government, now it has already been officially recognized, serious people are talking about it, then they are not going to put you and me, neither Europeans, nor us, nor the Chinese, nor the Japanese, into several cars. On the contrary, they are trying to introduce society into the Middle Ages, when the concept of horseless peasant suited the majority of the population in Europe and in our country. And only the aristocracy had horses. Only the aristocracy had a few horses, wagons, and carriages. So then, yes. Only they want to do it differently, not humanely. Therefore, there is still no way out. Either we ourselves delimit what we eat, consume, produce into good and bad, or they will delimit it for us differently. But we ourselves can delimit it humanely. The spectrum of production and consumption. Then everything will be fine. This is a whole science. This site has it. With mathematics, with everything, it is shown how to balance the intersectoral balance with an emphasis on what is prognosed in the future for society, and so that people live prosperously. But the most thing is not prosperously, but in order not to deprive future generations of the potential inherent in them from above. If a girl smokes and drinks, this deprives her child of the potential laid down from above. Humanity is a supersystem. According to the sufficiently general theory of governance, in any of the variants of hierarchically higher governance, on the conjugated intellect of the supersystem, including humanity, on the supersystem as a whole, on the whole of humanity, on its fragments, peoples, races, and individual elements, people, individuals, there are laid two complexes of particular tasks. Firstly, to somehow withstand the pressure of the external environment. Secondly, to use resources free from holding out against environmental pressure to achieve those objectives for the implementation of which the supersystem is introduced into the environment, or formed in the environment. These two sets of tasks form in time a flow of objectives of governance in relation to the environment. A flow of external to the supersystem, humanity and its elements, people, objectives of governance. In short, an external flow of objectives. It is clear that if all the resources of the supersystem are used to maintain its stable stay in the environment, then its productivity in relation to those objectives for which it was introduced into the environment is equal to zero. In addition, if the supersystem is suppressed by the environment or displaced by it, then there can be no question at all of achieving any objective whatsoever. That is precisely why all elements of the supersystem humanity must have free time to achieve the objectives that are set for it from above. These objectives, both the entire supersystem humanity and each of its elements, individual, must have a clear picture of, so that there is no substitution of true objectives for false ones. In this case, the genetically conditioned potential will be realized in life. If humanity as a set of elements of the supersystem, individuals, got lost in the objectives of development, then the realization of the potential genetically determined from above will not occur. And in this sad ending, such humanity, having come into conflict with the rest of the biosphere, will disappear as one gone astray in relation to the set for it from above objectives of development. So, free time is given to people not to search for all kinds of entertainment and perversions of their spirituality and genetics, but to realize the given from above genetically determined potential. J.V. Stalin understood this very well. Economic problems of socialism in the USSR. It would be wrong to think that such a substantial advance in the cultural standard of the members of society can be brought about without substantial changes in the present status of labor. For this, it is necessary, first of all, to shorten the working day to at least 6 and subsequently to 5 hours. This is needed in order that the members of society might have the necessary free time to receive an all-round education. It is necessary further to introduce universal compulsory polytechnical education, which is required in order that the members of society might be able to freely choose their occupations and not be tied to some one occupation all their lives. It is likewise necessary that housing conditions should be radically improved and that real wages of workers and employees should be at least doubled, if not more, both by means of a direct increase of wages and salaries, and more especially by further systematic reduction of prices for consumer goods. These are the basic conditions required to pave the way for the transition to communism. Only after all these preliminary conditions are satisfied in their entirety may it be hoped that work will be converted in the eyes of the members of society from a nuisance into life's prime want, Marx. That labor will become a pleasure instead of being a burden, Engels. And that social property will be regarded by all members of society as the sacred and inviolable basis for the existence of society. Only after all these preliminary conditions have been satisfied in their entirety will it be possible to pass from the socialist formula, from each according to his ability to each according to his work, to the communist formula, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. This will be a radical transition from one form of economy, the economy of socialism, to another, higher form of economy, the economy of communism. As we see, the transition from socialism to communism is not such a simple matter. If I tell you now that smoking and drinking is bad, not everyone will agree with me. And it comes from above, because it's absolutely obvious. The Quran even says, wine, drawing lots, this is from Satan. Muslims in their mass, who are believers, they don't drink. But it's true, almost everyone smokes and indulges in narcotics, because the Quran does not talk about this. That is why the scriptures are good only in the sense that they take from there a part of what really fits the revelations from above. But there not everything is said. What is good, what is bad? Question: how is this to be determined in general? And does it need to be determined? Well, for safety, for the survival of mankind in the future, this is necessary. There are various themes of demography, improvements of governance towards demography, but not a single one of them answers the question, what should be done at the given moment? Except for what comes from purely theological questions, very simple. Dividing everything that a person encounters in life into good and evil, the question is eternal. It is stated in all sacred scriptures, but not resolved. Why not resolved? And practice is the criterion of truth. All religious systems are flawed when you look at how people live in them. And not one of them gives a way out of the dead end. Once again, I want to say that now the Bible, the Old Testament, dominates in our society, in the world system humanity. At the basis, it is the Old Testament. There are two most militant systems that call not to sit idly by, but to fight. These are Judaism, historically the oldest, and Islam. Unfortunately, Islam, its leaders, and the heads of states of the Arab League and others have long been inscribed through the Jews into the Old Testament Talmudic system at a level even to the point that the tops of the Arab states are Jews concealed under the sign of Islam. Therefore, it is precisely the Bible that dominates in its Old Testament part. For Christians, if you hit on one cheek, then turn the other. That is, Christianity is historically not a militant religion. It is a religion of surrendering its territories to those who come there. If we, Russians, lived like this, then only according to the New Testament we would have long since been under someone. Therefore, there is only one way out. Reason is given to man. With the help of reason, he created this process. Not a single animal species has such a culture. Reason, creativity, technology. Now it has come to microcomputers in your pocket. You can watch anything you like. But we are on the verge of another global catastrophe. You need to take matters into your own hands at this stage and reject this process. 90% of what is produced and consumed is harmful, at least to ourselves and the reproduction of generations. Degradation is ongoing on a global scale, at the biological and spiritual levels. One complements the other. It is impossible to separate either one or the other, because man is a biologically spiritual being.
What is time? Everything that happens in the universe can be characterized as an oscillation process, both on the microcosm and macrocosm levels. The orbital revolution of electrons around a nucleus, the revolution of the Moon around the Earth, and the Earth and the planets around the Sun, the galactic rotation. Similarly, everything in a human life is subject to a certain pulse, tempo, or pace of living, and can be described as an oscillation process. Time is a correlation of frequencies of the oscillation processes, one of which is taken for a reference pattern. Since too many things in a human life are subject to the solar pulse, the period of revolution of the Earth around the Sun, a year, and the rotation period of the Earth, a day, were taken for a reference time. If we consider a human life as an oscillation process, we could see the following. Before the age of 25, a human being studies and does not take an active part in a social life. The age between 25 and 50 years is the period of the highest productivity in social activities of a human being. After the age of 50, most of people start to immerse themselves into their own problems and try to stay away from an active social life. Therefore, the most significant period of a human life in terms of social activity is the period of about 25 years. Similar principle can be found given the average age of a woman when she becomes a mother for the first time, which is also about 25 years. Since during the conceiving process a genetic information exchange is taking place and a newborn baby already possesses a new genetic code, this means that the information exchange on the biological level takes place every 25 years. Let's name this process as the frequency of biological time. Throughout the global historical process, it actually has not changed and remains constant. A human being is the only biological species on Earth which processes everything that he gets from nature and creates something new. Thus, beside the existing biosphere, a human being has created a technosphere, which he is continuously modifying and improving. The rate of the technosphere modification has been significantly gingered up by a legalized usurious interest, which is constantly stimulating the implementation of new technologies to pay off the debts. Is there any periodicity in the technosphere modification? Yes, there is such a periodicity, and it can be traced easily if we take as a basis one of the fields of the human activity, for example transport. A human being invented a dray cart, and it has served without any significant modifications for thousands of years. A human being invented a carriage, and it has driven for hundreds of years. A steam locomotive was invented, and its design has been modified in decades, from steam and diesel locomotives to electric locomotives and monorail. After the invention of automobile and airplane, the modification went on by single years. We can see that the frequency of technology modifications is constantly increasing, and if earlier it was measured by thousands of years, now it is measured simply by years. But technical information is just a part of the general information of the human culture. Basically, the whole culture is subject to the same law of variation, if we understand the culture as all the information beyond genetics. So let's name this frequency of information updating beyond the genetic level as the frequency of social time. The correlation of the biological time and the social time frequencies and their interrelation in the global historical process was named the law of time. Let's see how these frequencies are correlated. If earlier, during many hundreds and even thousands of years, the biological time frequency had been higher than the social time frequency, in the second half of the 20th century, the situation changed fundamentally. Now the social time frequency is higher than the biological time frequency. In the first half of the 20th century, when the biological time and the social time frequencies concurred, an event which in engineering is called resonance took place in the life of mankind. The event of resonance. Any system, even the one being in quiescence, has its own oscillation frequency. If a disturbing force having the frequency close or equal to the oscillation frequency of the system is applied to it, this will generate resonance. In other words, a dramatic increase in the oscillation range. The events of resonance may cause irreversible destructions in various mechanical systems, for example, an incorrectly designed bridge. Thus the Egyptian bridge crashed down in St. Petersburg in 1905 while a cavalry squadron was moving along it, and the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapsed in the USA in 1940. The mankind managed to pass through this period of time and survive because this period was insignificant in terms of its duration relative to the whole historical process, and the population of our planet has not reached the critical mass by that time, though the world had been shaken by a number of wars and revolutions. This period is named the Revelation or Apocalypse in the Bible. Currently, numerous changes in the information status of the society take place in the world during the life period of an individual human being and the life of a generation. The attitude of people to what is going on around them also changes. Therefore, the logic of social behavior of people has changed after the second half of the 20th century. In the period of time preceding the change of the logic of the social behavior, a human being came into the world, received some information, and that information has remained unshakable until the moment the human being left the world. The one who was initiated into some secret or sacred knowledge at the beginning of life could prosper until the end of his life due to monopoly of this knowledge. The one who did not get such initiation had to work hard, for example, digging the ground. Now the time of initiations is over. They have lost any sense as a result of the increasing social time frequency. The rate of the technological development can be illustrated by the information provided by Cisco chief futurist Dave Evans. Today we know 5% of what we will know in 50 years. In other words, in 50 years, 95% of what we will know will have been discovered in the past 50 years. The world's data will increase sixfold in each of the next 2 years, while corporate data will grow 50-fold. Within 2 years, information on the internet will double every 11 hours. By 2015, the mankind will create information content equivalent to 92.5 million libraries of Congress in 1 year. Under the social behavior logic that has changed, a human being either learns and masters new knowledge continuously, reviews and revises his stereotypes, or moves to the dump of history. To be adapted to a rapidly changing world, a human being must be able to learn and master new knowledge continuously during all his life, and for this he must be able to learn by himself. A method for conceiving and mastering new knowledge must be developed. The main principle of the mankind enslavement is based on the use of the monopoly of knowledge. A small group of parasites sitting on top of the social pyramid possesses comprehensive and complete knowledge belonging to the whole mankind, and the closer the base of the pyramid is, the less knowledge is provided to people. Basically, two symbolic pyramids may be considered. One is the pyramid of power, with its tip pointing up, and the other is the pyramid of knowledge, with the tip pointing down. The law of time ruins this system of pyramids. A contemporary slaveholder, a master of working men, has to provide his slaves with new knowledge continuously, to make them work better and produce a profit while the social time is speeding up. But if the slaves get more and more knowledge, they will not be slaves anymore. Within one's comprehension of the common order of things, each one works for oneself, and within one's incomprehension, for the one who comprehends more. The comprehension of the law of time and the helplessness of the present-day slaveholders in relation to it are expressed by Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin in his great poem Ruslan and Ludmila with the following words: "From sky the stars he'll pluck, I'll wager, or shift the moon that sails on high, but change the law of time and aging he cannot, hard as he may try."
About the law of time in general, that's enough for now. Now, worldview questions. For some, this is unpleasant to hear, because it will be necessary to give up something that you've loved since childhood or from some point. But the system of security set from above for any biological species and for humans in the first place, it obliges to make such decisions right now. First of all, those who use narcotics, which include tobacco and alcohol, immediately stop with this, despite the company of friends they like and other things. And I do not advise them to do so, because further we will go through human psychology. I will show there that among people there is also natural selection. As with animals and other biological species that have natural selection, it is the strongest who survive. Those who lag behind from the pack, they die. And among people, it is the most highly nravious who will survive now. This is also given from above. Not the evil nravious, not scoundrels, as many people think, they show this in films, but the most highly nravious people will remain living. And in the Quran it is said about this that God and His helpers will win. Well, it was said 13 centuries ago, but it is very relevant now. Now, worldview aspects. The material is quite serious and, as experience shows, difficult to understand. I'll try to be brief. I will now reveal the secrets that have been hidden from society, at least since the time of ancient Egypt and ancient civilizations. First, a brief model of evolution. You were probably given this at school. There is such a concept as the spiral of evolution, how everything develops in general, civilization and society. I have already said that our civilization started from a kind of informational zero, and the informational support for the first people of our civilization was given only at the level of genetics. With what they were born, with some minimum of information, and God believed that this was enough for self-adaptation in the environment. For a very long time, for people, the environment was nature. Imagine for yourselves how everything has changed now. If you look out the window, sometimes you won't even see the trees. 100 years ago, in our civilization, another 90% lived in nature. Big cities are dangerous for the realization of human potential, and we will have to go away from this in the near future. It should be the settlement system. We have also developed this settling doctrine. Most of you come from the provinces and think that it's better here. There is simply more knowledge here. More financial opportunities. But it is necessary to upbring the younger generation, by all means taking them out of the city, at least for the summer. Based on the results of thousands of years of history, one may get the impression that the harmonious life of people on the planet is an impossible phenomenon and contradicts the essence of things. Objectively, human life is now impossible on other planets, for example on Mars or Saturn. Therefore, it is necessary to correct the mistakes made in the arrangement of people's lives on our planet. Numerous diseases, viruses, social cataclysms, and ecological catastrophes, which are increasingly occurring on Earth, are being presented through the degreed, near-scientific circles as a direct result of the excessive overpopulation of the planet. To better understand the real scale of the overpopulation problem, imagine for a moment that we have declared a general mobilization and gathered the entire population of the planet in one place. At the end of 2011, this number was 7 billion people. We will accommodate 2 people per square meter, which is several times more spacious than at rush hour in a subway car or in a crowded stadium during a match. As a result, a square is formed with one side a little over 59 kilometers. To visualize this size, let's put the resulting square on the map of Moscow. It is outlined in red on the plan. And it will become obvious what a relatively small area is needed to accommodate the entire population of the planet. If we take only the population of Russia, then, acting in this way, a square with a side of 8 kilometers will be obtained. It is marked in green on the map. On a planet-wide map, this square, containing the entire population of the planet, is barely visible. After the population of the entire Earth has been mentally concentrated in one place, the real situation with the imaginary overpopulation of the planet becomes clear. Obviously, with such a concentration, people will not be able to stay for a long time. They need space for movement and maintenance of hygiene, housing, food, a place for applying labor to reveal their intellectual and creative potential, and so forth. But now, when it's become obvious that there is enough space for everyone, and moreover with a large margin for many millennia to come, questions arise. How to reasonably disperse people across the planet? How to equip their labor and life? How is it necessary to distribute the area on their native land in such a way that there no longer is an imaginary feeling of the overpopulation of the planet? We can say that the plan of the settlement is a projection on the plane of the lifestyle that its inhabitants lead. This projection directly reflects the ideals and priorities of society, its nervousness and logics of behavior, the character of needs, and, not least, the general culture of governance with its inadequacy and vices. One of the manifestations of the historically established governance towards the given process, its figurative expression, is metropolitan urbanization. The seeming at first glance diversity of manifestations of metropolitan urbanization throughout the planet are in fact no different from each other, and the visible difference is just an imaginary diversity of scenery. The essential picture is the same everywhere. Overpopulation in cities, a decrease in the general level of health of residents, an increase in the number of accidents, emergencies, etc. are observed everywhere. Previously, the form of settlement was the village, but after all, almost all modern cities have grown from the former village settlements. Since the organization of the village space does not imply limiting the growth of its size, this subsequently served as an impetus for the further extensive expansion of the territory of settlements, and as a result, what was within walking distance, hospitals, gymnasiums, food shops, terminals, and so forth, moved away from each other for kilometers, to overcome which new roads were built, which subsequently required further expansion of streets and highways to the detriment of residential areas. In the past, the main reason for the exodus to the cities was the yoke of the church. It was precisely for the sake of spiritual freedom from the monopolistic pressure of idealistic atheism that people fled to the cities, where they were awaited by pressure with a lower priority: usury. Usury, in turn, gave rise to an absolutely artificial process in cities and metropolitan areas: daily labor migration. In the morning from the periphery to the city, in the evening back from the city to the periphery. This is such a kind of gravity of megacities which, like the moon, generates daily ebb and flow of the city resource. Objectively, now, along with the process of urbanization, the opposite process is gaining momentum: deurbanization. Each major city is overgrown with green rings of dachas and vegetable gardens, which are constantly pushed aside by urban development to the periphery. People feel the unnaturalness of conditions of the city and unconsciously strive for nature, for fresh air. Due to the fact that the process of deurbanization proceeds spontaneously, it becomes not an alternative, but just a suburban modification of metropolitan urbanization. since cramped patches of dacha plots are not enough for a full-fledged life and serve only as a platform for short-term weekend resorts. A full-fledged alternative, both urban and suburban modification of metropolitan urbanization, should be landscape estate urbanization. In landscape estate urbanization, the family is understood as the most significant social institution, the seed from which society grows. Accordingly, the design and construction of residential buildings is very important among the entire list of the vector of objectives of governance. If we go into the inner meaning of the Russian word family, semya, then these are 7 selves. But if this is so, then the question of the personal composition of these 7 selves inevitably arises. In our understanding, these are adults who have married, and the parents of each of them, plus a child, at least one, who was conceived, born, and upbrought by those who entered marriage. That is, a family is a child, his father and mother, 2 grandfathers and 2 grandmothers, each of his family lines of ancestors. Thus, houses should be designed with the expectation of a full-fledged family. One needs to upbring children on the ground, and not in the sky-high heights of concrete skyscrapers. With this understanding of the family, a low-rise building with an area at the base of the foundation of 10 by 10 meters or more is suitable. Obviously, the materials for such a house should be ecologically friendly, with a minimal use of polymer and various synthetic elements. The house for the family and the plot are one, and together form an estate. The size of the plot is primarily affected by the total number of people in the family, as a minimum based on the calculation of 3 acres per person. This ratio of area per person provides sufficient conditions for full-fledged development. Taking this proportion as a basis, it turns out that the minimum size of a plot for a family is 25 acres. Now let's move on to the shape of the plot. For the settlement model considered in this video, a trapezoid-shaped site was chosen. What positive properties does this shape give to the site as a whole? Or is it just some kind of whim to artificially give the uniqueness of the settlement model? Firstly, within the majority of possible shapes, the trapezoid belongs to the list of least fanciful ones, and as a result will not subsequently lead to problems when transferring the settlement model to nature on a specific piece of land. That is, for a geodesist, it will be no more complicated than an ordinary rectangle, since a trapezoid consists of 2 triangles on which geodesy operates. The shape of the trapezoid is closest to the already familiar and accustomed to rectangle, which excludes its rejection both by builders and subsequent owners. A trapezoid, unlike a rectangle, itself strives for diversity, self-organization, and develops into more lively curvilinear models. As a result, when choosing a trapezoid, the plastic basis of the design of the districts of a low-rise settlement become a diverse curvilinear shape. We call this the plastic matrix of the trapezoid. That is, the very shape of the trapezoid, when comparing elements and sections, stimulates, tunes in to the formation of more living silhouettes of the districts and streets of the settlements than a rectangle can do. If some of the trapezoids are turned to the center of the circle not with a small base, but with a large one, then through this it is possible to indirectly control the radius of the resulting shape. Also in this way you can get the radius of the changing curvature. The plots are formed with each other into a common area, not on their bare form, but are first framed by a buffer belt of trees and shrubs 10 to 15 meters wide. In turn, the buffer belts, when compiling sections, do not close closely, but at a distance of 10 to 20 meters from each other. Such a size of settlement is purpose consonant in order to be able to take the path on foot from the most remote point of the village to the center. This would take no more than 25 to 30 minutes. So if the average speed of a pedestrian is 3 to 5 kilometers per hour, then the optimal diameter of the settlement is within 3 to 3.5 kilometers, which is an area of about 1,000 to 1,500 hectares. And the size of the population should be no more than 2.5 to 3,000 inhabitants, so that each person can personally know and fully communicate with at least a third of the total number of inhabitants. The rest will be compensated by cross-acquaintances of each of the residents. In order not to continue to produce exorbitantly developing urban monsters, the plan of the settlement, its structure, must contain within itself an algorithm that prevents the exorbitant growth of its own size and maintains the ratio between the territories of human life and nature, so that it doesn't turn out again that there is a city separately, and separately places of rest. That is, nature should be a full-fledged component of the settlement, be its integral part, not as it happens now when you can get to nature only when you're outside the city. In order for the low-rise settlement to contain the limit of potential growth so that the internal algorithm directs and restrains the growth rate of the settlement in the future, the choice was made in the plan drawing in the form of a hexagon. Along with the well-known properties of the hexagon, such as maximum stability and strength, multiple symmetry, universality, the hexagon occupies a middle position between an absolute round circle and the angularity of the rectangle. That is, the prism equally contains the potential inclinations of both circles and rectangular figures. But still, in the classic hexagon, there is no restrictive limit to overgrowth. If we take a hexagon as a basis in its pure form, then it won't differ in any way from a rectangle in its appetite for expansion on a plane. Therefore, it is necessary to breathe life into it, to give dynamics to the internal structure, for which the following transformation was made. In nature, on planet Earth, and in the entire universe as a whole, spiral shapes, the dynamics of which is built in the golden ratio, predominate. Quite a lot of similar examples have already been found, and they can easily be found on the internet. Let us try to combine these two principles, the statics of the hexagon and the dynamics of the spiral. To build a classic hexagon, we would take a segment, lay it out on a plane, then attach the same segment to it at an angle of 60 degrees. And acting in this way, after 6 steps we would close the shape and get a regular hexagon. When constructing a dynamic hexagon, we will also lay out the first segment, but postponing the next segment at an angle of 60 degrees, we will increase its length by the increment obtained by the golden ratio. We will do the same with all the other parts. And the result is a dynamic hexagon designed into a spiral, an endless spiral, and containing the seed of the golden ratio. Making along the axis of the spiral a green corridor, the width of which also increases along the golden ratio on each subsequent segment. Thus, the forest area necessary for each development sector is provided. In this way, the balance between the territory of the forest and living area is solved. This forest corridor must be protected from any development, and as such it will be an ecological reserve for the stability of the settlement. A low-rise settlement of a landscape estate type should absorb the comfort of the city and the closeness of nature inherent in the village. This should be a qualitatively different level of organization of lives of people. The settlement should have high-quality roads, electricity, heat, high-speed internet, telephone communications, and the like. In low-rise settlements of the landscape estate type, there must be their own nurseries, kindergartens, their own schools, their own universities, their own libraries, concert halls, and houses of culture, warehouses, common parking lots, administrative buildings, as well as enterprises and factories that will provide permanent place of work for their residents. Only in this case will low-rise settlements be viable. We are deeply convinced that people should live on their land in low-rise buildings and surrounded by nature, and not in reinforced concrete boxes. At the same time, landscape estate urbanization is not a magic recipe or a panacea for the problems generated by the biospheric social crisis. No one can also guarantee that we will be insured against the danger of becoming a society of a previous community made up of scoundrels, because the new life will not come by itself, for even today, as thousands of years ago, the kingdom of God is only being proclaimed, but everyone enters into it through their meaningful volitional efforts. Even no ideal house, even if it is a log house ecologically friendly to the last chip, will save you from disorder at the level of the settlement and throughout the world as a whole. The best motivation to work is by the personal example of the deed. That is why we took pencils and paper and began to create sketches and notes, which are now embodied in specific models of a low-rise landscape estate type settlement, which this video introduces. We will continue to create other models of settlements on the principle of landscape estate urbanization, and this program is the minimum for our creative team, while the maximum program is the transformation of our native planet into a blooming garden by creating low-rise landscape estate type settlements in a specific area.
некая модель
a certain model of evolution.
эволюции. Можно ее
You can depict it like this in a section.
в разрезе. Коническая
Conical
модель
funnel with
с
transparent
прозрачными
walls.
стенками.
Why funnel?
Так вот есть. Это
So
только
if
картинка,
this is just a picture in order to get at least some understanding,
не сама
not
эволюция,
evolution
модель,
itself, but a model, a very approximate model.
Вот это
This is the directionality of the process. The laying of the rope goes like this here.
каната вот так вот идет.
The information at the beginning of civilization
На
is
начале
zero.
цивилизации 0.
The rope
представляет собой
in this
символ
model is a symbol of information,
модели
informational content,
информационного наполнения
levels of this funnel,
уровней
a spiral of development.
вот этой воронки развития, спирали развития. Символ информации. Заполнение
The beginning of the filling of the next turn of evolution only after the filling of the previous one. One turn is informationally filled,
Вот один виток заполнился,
only after that is the next turn filled.
идет заполнение следующего витка.
Therefore the walls are, as it were, tilted down,
Предыдущий виток
and the previous turn,
подпирает следующий, иначе
it is not visible here,
канат
it
соскользнет.
supports the next one. Otherwise the rope will slide down along the sloping walls of the funnel.
То есть
That is,
канат
the
это
rope
символ
is a symbol of
информационного
information,
наполнения
informational
человека
content.
существо.
Man is an informational, otherwise spiritual being.
Это информация,
Spirit is information.
иначе
Spirit in religious systems,
в религиозном,
information in scientific systems.
в научных информациях.
Now this word has been adopted since the end of the 20th century.
До 20
Until the
века
20th
информация
century, information was not recognized as something separate.
Если я
Well, if I don't give you information, you won't know.
Если вы не
If you
будете
don't
чего-то
know
знать,
something,
если я
if
вам
I
не
didn't
сказал,
tell you,
например,
for example,
или вы не
or if you
получили
didn't receive
информацию,
information that there is a traffic jam in some place,
вы туда
you will go
поедете,
there
будете терять
and waste
время
time there at
в
best.
лучшем случае.
And if in some place in the road there is a hole or an abyss has been dug up, you can fall in there in the car. That's what information is. Information is more valuable than money.
Дороже денег.
According to one of the legends, 200 years ago, Napoleon was losing the Battle of Waterloo. According to legend, Nathan and Jacob Rothschild were watching the battle closely. In addition to financial worries, the Rothschilds could afford only one hobby: carrier pigeons. After the battle, the pigeons were immediately released with coded instructions tied to their legs. But the Rothschilds did not want to take risks, and having barely made sure that Napoleon was losing the battle, Nathan, riding expensive horses, rushes to London himself. In the morning, Nathan Rothschild appears at the London Stock Exchange. He was the only one in London who knew about the defeat of Napoleon. Lamenting over the successes of Napoleon, he began to hastily sell his shares. The panic raised by a direct witness of the decisive battle forced others to lower English, Austrian and Prussian securities. They became cheaper every minute, and were bought up in bulk by the Rothschild agents. The fact that Napoleon lost the battle was not found out at the stock exchange until a day later. Many securities holders committed suicide, and Nathan made £40 million. Real information obtained before others allowed the Rothschilds to play a sure win game on the stock exchange. It was Nathan Rothschild who was credited with the classic phrase, "Who owns the information, he owns the world." Since then, the price and importance of owning information has increased exponentially. The historical process is changing radically before our eyes. For the first time in the history of mankind, the interests of the masses of the people, each and every one, and the free thought of the individual determine the life of mankind, or the measure of his ideas about Spravedlivosť. Humanity taken as a whole becomes a powerful geological force, And before him, before his thought and labor, there stands the question of restructuring the biosphere in the interests of free-thinking humanity as a single whole. Excerpt from an article by V. I. Vernadsky, 1944. The initiates know about this. If you have information on how to get money, then in the given case, the information is primary. If you don't have it, you will not get money. You will not know where it comes from. Information is more valuable than money. Therefore, for example, the archives of the Vatican, only 1% of which is open, contain a lot of information, including that Jesus Christ had a wife and children. But they won't say it because it's convenient for them. This is an assumption, of course. Subsequent turns are filled only after the previous turns have been filled. Otherwise the rope will slip and there will be a rollback to the past in terms of information. If at the beginning there was about zero information, then it began to gradually accumulate. Suppose the Copper Age ended, the Bronze Age began, and so on, and so it was filled. Or you can take formations. The slave-owning formation has completely exhausted itself at some stage. Usually there is a step-by-step evolution. Further, there could live neither slaves nor the elite. And they moved gradually, some earlier, some later in different civilizations. Already society entered feudalism. Feudalism exhausted itself. The aristocracy was no longer able to govern the peasants, too, as slaves. Capitalism began. They took up and gave, as it were, equal rights. They liberated the peasants, but in reality, as it were, everything remained the same. Exploitation. The only thing that expanded was the circle of governors. This is a separate question. Capitalism ended, socialism began. Everything was filled also informationally. Well, after that we get a certain rollback, in our country anyway, that is, this is a breakdown. But the point is not in this. So here is such a scheme. Is only a scheme, a research process, a scientific process. There generally has always been science. Where does this research process begin? So a primitive man comes, he sees something in front of him. He begins to explore it, to research it. Then he makes something out of it. That is, man explores matter, he researches matter. Everything that is material, it is accessible in general. The matter that was in the primordial world, after the catastrophe, it was accessible, it was investigated. As a result of the study of matter, they studied nature, mainly some kind of tools. They received information. This information was gradually accumulated. Then, as a result of this information, since man was given creativity, he began to have ideas. Maybe I can actually do something. And then he started to receive information simply through abstract thinking. With the help of this information, the matter was changed again. And so it went on. While exploring, while researching matter, and developing their thoughts already at the level of the psyche, they received more and more new information. Society entered the next stage of development. So what kind of image is this funnel? It is the most important. Why can't we go somewhere here in development? Where did the spiral come from? You take centrifugal force, you begin to develop too quickly. And if too quickly, then the rope slips and falls down, i.e. fast development. If we overtake this development, then there will be a deviation from the set one. The funnel is a symbol of the measure of development. We have matter that man investigates, he explores it. Well, everyone knows what matter is. At the level of physics, of course, not everyone knows what matter is, because matter, this is substance. Plasma. Energy is also matter, the transition state of substance. I won't go into details, everything is written in detail in the textbooks. And the vacuum is also a variety of matter. Physicists have proven this. Moreover, substance and other types of matter are formed from the vacuum and can again go back into the vacuum. Dematerialize into the vacuum. I won't go into more details now. The funnel is a symbol of measure. The rope is a symbol of information. Information without matter is nothing. It is impossible to transmit information without a material carrier. For a very long time, information was transmitted at the level of culture through books. So this here is a material carrier. It is written on it. In order to receive information, I must convey this to you, or say it. Prior to this, information was transmitted orally. When there was no developed writing yet, something was told orally. From here we get the Bilinas, the epics. In order to transmit information, a material carrier is needed. In any case, one who possesses this information. There is no information without matter. It must be recorded on something. There necessarily must be a carrier of information. And measure, this is what is set from above, and what determines the process of evolution. In theological matters, this is God's providence, an obraz. Moreover, everything is set in it. If this is God's providence, everything is set. There is what is good and what is bad, and various aspects. To some extent, the various aspects set from above in God's providence entered the sacred writings. Somewhere they entered quite accurately on some questions, somewhere they are perverted to the point that the opposite is true. This is especially so with Judaism. There is a lot that is perverted right up to the point of the opposite, what is good and what is bad. That is such a model of evolution, a most approximate one, only a model. It presupposes that there is an objective dobro and evil. Now there is an opinion that the ways of the Lord are inscrutable. In reality, no. Objectively, dobro and evil exist. First of all, painful questions, something that probably concerns all of you. Drinking and smoking is objectively harmful. You are depriving yourself and the future generations of happiness. Happiness that comes from God, and not from people or from some kind of hierarchy. For example, producers of alcohol and tobacco, they have a different happiness, to sell more. Moreover, they are all mostly foreign companies that have settled in our country. It turns out that the formula of development, matter and information, change in measure. Matter and information change in measure.
Через ять пишется. Нету сейчас такой буквы в русском языке.
God's providence or God's predetermination is a measure of development. Matter and information change in measure. The measure of development is given from above, or otherwise God's providence in religions. Much is taken from the Quran in this aspect. God created all things and gave them their due measure. Another translation, God created all beings and by predetermining, predetermined their being. God's predetermination, just a model. If someone noticed already, in this model, there is neither space nor time. Here there is no time. There is a process. If humanity had accumulated information earlier, then there would have been a transition to another stage earlier, a little earlier. If later, then later. A certain freedom is given within the framework of God's providence. Going out of bounds is not possible. Going beyond the boundaries, this is a global catastrophe in a big way, in a large way. This is for the world, God's providence for the world. A certain limited model of evolution in relation to the world. Space and time, here they don't exist, as clearly expressed fundamental categories of creation. The most important caste that governed everything was the caste of Jretzes. They also prescribed to the king how to live and what to do. The highest deity of the Egyptians was Amun. In his person, 4 deities were united: the goddess Net, the substance of whom everything in the world consists; the god Neph, the spirit that animates the substance, or the force that compels it to combine, change, act; the goddess Pasht, infinite space occupied by substance; the god Sebek, infinite time which we perceive through the constant changing of substance. Everything that is in the world, according to the teachings of the Egyptians, comes from substance through the impact of an invisible force, occupies space, and changes over time. And all this mysteriously unites into the 4 hypostatical being, Amun. This is an excerpt from the book Primary School Reader by V. Vodovozov, St. Petersburg, 1878, intended for self-education at the end of the 19th century, which dealt with the ancient Egyptians' views on objective reality. In the Bible, and the church culture based on the Bible, this false set of primary categories, Amun, slipped in ancient times for the grazing of the crowd, entered under the name Amen, with which spell many prayers in the churches in the name of Christ end. That is, the ultimate generalizing categories perceived as primary concepts about the objectiveness of creation, in the present civilization for millennia unchangingly remain: matter, substance, spirit, understood both as energy, force, and as a governing principle, that is, information; space, time. In reality, the concepts of space and time are secondary in relation to the objective measure determination and the concept of it. They arise in the process of the direct or indirect correlation of the observed object, process, with some similar object standard in a certain sense, although this correlation is not always determinedly recognized by the subject. One of the ways of correlating the measured object with the standard gives the perception of temporal commensurability. The other gives the perception of spatial commensurability. The famous formula E is equal to mc squared connects 2 ways of measuring the amount of matter. It is possible to measure it in terms of energy units and the usual one in units of mass, with spatial and temporal commensurability. The same kind of interconditionality arises from the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Even if these formulas of modern physics objectively contain in themselves some quantitative inaccuracy, they nonetheless deny the objective independence of space and time as informational characteristics, predetermined in the measure of being of the material creation. That is, space, time, are not the properties of an objective, empty receptacle in which the material creation, with all those living in it, is placed, but the properties of the tri-united creation itself, perceived by a person in the quality of co-measuredness, commensurability, of fragments of creation, existing as a process of probabilistically predetermined by measure transformations of matter, with the reflection of information transferred together with energy, matter, from one fragment of creation to another. A certain limited model of evolution in relation to the world. Space and time here do not exist as clearly expressed fundamental categories of creation, and the formula of development, matter, information, changes to the measure of development. Well, this is one of the, so to speak, illustrative examples. In general, not even examples, but an example of knowledge that confirms the immortality of the soul. And secondly, this knowledge was hidden from society for a very long time, because society still lives in the system. It is called this in English, MEST, matter, energy, space and time. A known system, I won't dwell on it, matter, energy, space, time. The whole society lives in this system now. It is false and perverted. In reality, the three fundamental categories are matter, information, and measure. Here there is no measure. It is so convenient to simply fool both scientists and representatives of all industries through space and time. And this was especially done by the famous so-called physicist Albert Einstein, who came up with the general and special theory of relativity, where space and time, energy and matter were fundamental categories for fools. Therefore, physics is now at a dead end, thanks to the efforts of Einstein and other scientists, mostly of Jewish origin. These are two systems. This is for the crowd. Remember, I drew the pyramid. Those who are at the top, for them, this system is the triunity of matter, information, measure. And then, for the elite already, for the Jews, there are the holy books of Thoth, seeable in the Kabbalah, very hidden, but the triunity is given there. And for the rest, it is already lower. This is the system for the crowd, so that, God forbid, they did not break through to God's providence, what is good and what is bad. The main thing is to hide what is good and what is bad. Objective criteria for all occasions. So objective criteria are set for all occasions of life. The only question is how to get them from there. They are not in the sacred writings. A little bit here and there, pieces are given and that's it. In the Quran, for example, wine is harmful but they drink, but still it's not enough. Or in the Bible, there is the New Testament, chastity is maintained. So what do we have? Go to the priests to atone for sins, including debauchery. Even the New Testament, it does not work in this regard. because people have no inner conviction in this. The system in principle has other models. For example, in the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, there is such a symbolism. In St. Petersburg, we have a symbol of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. A staff and two snakes. What is hidden, hermeticized, in the symbolism of the staff, and what is hidden in the system of primary differences in the ultimately generalizing category all, not intended for everyone but for a narrow circle of people who have long ago usurped the highest forms of global intrasocial power? The answer to this question can be found in the occult literature. 32 ways, wonderful and wise, God of Israel, God alive and the eternal King, El Shaddai, merciful and forgiving, sublime and staying in eternity. Holy is his name, inscribed in 32 characters, and created his world, spurring it by 3 sephirims, Sephar, Sipur, and Cipher. What follows is an excerpt from the book by V. Shmakov, the Sacred Book of Thoth, the Great Archon of the Tarot, written in 1916. The first of these 3 terms, Sephar, should mean numbers, which alone give us the opportunity to determine the necessary purposes and relationships of each, by the context perhaps a person, and things, in order to understand the purpose for which it was created, and measure of length, and measure of capacity, and measure of weight, movement, and harmony. All these things are governed by numbers. The second term, Sipur, expresses the word and the voice, because it is the divine word. It is the voice of the living God who gave birth to beings under their various forms, be they external, be they internal. It is this that is to be understood in these words. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Finally, the third term, Sefer, means writing. God's scripture is the fruit of creation. The words of God are his writing. The thought of God is the word. So, thought, word, and writing are only one in God, while in man they are 3. What turns out is the formula of creation: measure, information, matter. The system of the triunity of matter, information, measure, the most generalizing concept categories and their interconnections within creation, is one for understanding and describing everything in the hierarchy of creation, from the microcosm to the macrocosm, including the life of civilization. Accordingly, in the human worldview, it is the triunity of matter, information, measure, characteristic of creation as a whole and its fragments, which is the consubstantial and inseparable trinity, which is loved by the one God, the Creator and the All-Holder. The staff of Hermes is one of the ancient symbols of the Hermeticists. 2 snakes wrap around one winged staff. The owner of the staff is Hermes, the deified messenger, one who, according to legend, brought knowledge to Egypt. From him came Hermeticism, secret knowledge under the stamp of secrecy, only for the initiates, for disclosure, death. Since ancient times, the staff has been a symbol of a certain power and a measure of length. In the allegorical drawing, the staff is a symbol of measure in general, and the 2 snakes, whose heads are on the same level, symbolize 2 mutually conditioned processes of the evolutionary development of material forms and souls, informational modules, that accumulate information and govern these material forms. Snakes, unlike ropes, have heads and can only crawl head first, which symbolizes the unidirectionality of the evolutionary process. The hand holding the staff measure directs the development of 2 evolutionary spirals, matter and information, up the hierarchy of the universe. The heads of the snakes are on the same level, as a symbol of co-measuredness. The evolutionary process of matter cannot overtake the evolutionary process of the spirit, information, or lag behind it. From this, one can see the absurdity in the posing of the fundamental question of philosophy of dialectical materialism: what comes first, matter or spirit, consciousness? On the basis of this question, nothing could be built. since it is measure that determines the change in both matter and information, spirit. The fundamental question of philosophy, practically useful wisdom, is the question of the predictability of consequences with a detailedness sufficient for the conduct of activities by people, including governance towards circumstances, both alone and collectively in real-life circumstances. Analogous views on the fundamental question of vitally useful philosophy, as the question of the predictability of consequences of human activity, were also expressed during the lifetime of the founders of Marxism. So the 19th century English ethnographer E.B. Tylor, a contemporary of K. Marx and F. Engels, 1820-1895, spoke about the philosophy of history at large, explaining the past and predicting the future phenomena of man's life in the world by reference to general laws. The statement sometimes attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte, similar in meaning, came even earlier. To foresee is to govern. And this is the only sensible statement of the fundamental question of philosophy, which can be traced throughout the history of modern civilization, at least in the form of an unfading practical interest in the possibilities of foreseeing the future at the level from personal everyday to pan-universal, in order to choose the best behavior in the present and foreseeable future. And according to it, the methodology of cognition of objective reality, which allows to process a lot of disparate particular facts into a unity of opinions confirmed by life about the currents and prospects of any of their processes in the universe, including the development of human society, is the only useful philosophy, in view of the oneness of objective reality and the multifacetedness of one and the same truth common to all inhabitants of the universe. The hermetization of vital information took place. The staff is a symbol of measure, a symbol of development, and the two snakes, these are matter and information, which are on the same level. Hence the fundamental question of philosophy, what is primary, matter or spirit, it disappears by itself. And the answer to it is, nothing is primary, neither matter nor information nor spirit. But what is primary is the measure set from above, the measure of development. Chapter 25 of the Quran is called the distinction, and it gives a system of primary differences in the ultimately generalizing meaning category, all. Let us turn to it. In the translation by Abdul Manan Omar, with the name of God, the most gracious, the ever merciful, blessed is he who revealed the Al-Furqan, this Quran, to his servant that he may be a warner to all the peoples. It is he to whom the sovereignty, it would be more precise to say plenocracy, this is our clarification, of the heavens and the earth belongs. And he has begotten nor taken to himself a son, nor is there any associate with him in the sovereignty. Again, it would be better to say plenocracy, our clarification. He has created everything and has determined its proper measure. Yet people worship apart from him gods who, rather than create anything, are themselves created, and who have no power of averting harm or doing good to themselves, nor have they any control over death or life or resurrection. The same ayats in the translation by Dr. Gali. Supremely blessed is he who has sent down the all-distinctive criterion upon his bondsman, that he may be a warner to the worlds, to whom belongs the kingdom of the heavens and the earth, and he has not taken to him a child, and he has no associate in the kingdom, and he created everything, so he has determined it an exact determination. And they have taken to themselves gods apart from him, that create nothing and themselves are created, and possess for themselves neither harm nor profit, neither do they possess death, nor life, nor uprising, i.e. resurrection. The same ayats in the translation of Muhammad Pickthall. In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, blessed is he who hath revealed unto his slave the criterion of right and wrong, that he may be a warner to the peoples. He unto whom belongeth the sovereignty of the heavens and the earth, he hath chosen no son, nor hath he any partner in the sovereignty. He hath created everything, and hath meted out for it a measure. Yet they choose beside him other gods, who create naught, but are themselves created, and possess not hurt nor profit for themselves, and possess not death nor life, nor power to raise the dead. Different translations express different facets of the meaning contained in the words of the original language, which is why we have quoted several editions of the translations. What we have put in bold in the quote are the keys to entering the system of unchangingly primary differences in the ultimately generalizing category, all, which correspond to the Quranic views on created creation, plenocracy over which, as a whole and in fragments, belongs undividedly only to God. God bestoweth his sovereignty on whom he will, Surah 2:247, and someone's autocracy is illusory, and acts only within the established for him boundaries of God's allowance. First of all, it should be noted that the Quran everywhere proclaims a worldview that is different from all varieties of I-centrism. Through the Quran, people who come across it and its translations are invited to accept, as a conscious norm, the organization of the psyche of individuals and societies, the worldview going from God to every person. The worldview goes from God in at least two mutually complementary senses, both as given in revelation from above, and as determining the ordering of the deployment of the mosaic of the human mental tree in a univocally determined order. Firstly, the obras of God in the soul of everyone, and secondly, the obras of created creation, given in distinction as a system of paired relationships, this, not this, part of which is the person himself, along with his psychic organization and inner world. Now let us move on directly to the question of the unchangingly primary differences in the ultimately generalizing category, all, which corresponds to the Quranic views on the created creation. As can be seen from the previously quoted texts of translations of the Quran, some translators preferred to express the meaning of the predeterminedness of being. Others preferred to express the meaning of measure, dimensionality of being, and co-measuredness in the course of events. That is, the Arabic word which they encountered contains both meanings, which in translation can be combined only in the two-word combination predetermined measure, called by Abdul Manan Omar proper, a word that expresses one of the aspects of determinedness as a component of higher predeterminedness. Therefore, if we turn to the words that we have highlighted in the given translations of the ayats of the 25th surah of the Quran, then their generalized multifaceted meaning can be expressed in the following final phrase. God created everything and every being that exists in creation and bestowed everything its proper, predetermined by him measure. If we speak in the language of modern science, then everything that exists in creation is matter in its various aggregate states, vacuum. On a side note, we will say that those who don't agree to recognize the vacuum as matter, capable of interacting with matter in its different aggregate states, let them explain to everyone else how waves, electromagnetic, gravitational, and such like oscillations propagate in ideal nothingness, in emptiness. The vacuum is not nothing but something, matter, in one of its aggregate states. So we have vacuum, physical fields, plasma, which is highly ionized gas in which electrons have such energy that they cannot remain in atoms in stable orbit, gaseous state of substance, liquid state of substance, solid, crystalline state of substance. Aggregate states, paths and ways of transition from one state to others, the properties of matter in each of them, and in transient processes, are predetermined for matter from above. And people's views on these various aggregate states, in one way or the other, correspond to the Russian proverb, "There is no thing without an obraz." But what is measure, and what relation does it have to obrazes of matter? This question is not considered in I-centric philosophical systems. The science of measure, numerical determinateness in itself, is mathematics, but in the material creation, measure, numerical determinateness, ceases to be in and of itself. It is embodied in objects and subjects of creation, everything bestowed with a predetermined from above measure, numerical determinateness, both quantitative and ordinal. In creation, everything is material, and the measures of some fragments are numerically juxtaposable with the measures of other fragments. That is, all fragments of creation are characterized by commensurability, both among themselves and with their components. Measure is, first of all, numerical determinateness. 2 by 2 is equal to 4. 1 second, 9,192,000,000 631,770 periods of radiation corresponding to the transition between two hyperfine levels of the ground state of the 133 CS atom, Celsius standard of frequency and time. 1 meter, 1,650,763.73 wavelengths in a vacuum of radiation corresponding to the transition between the 2p to the power of 10 and 5d to the power of 5 levels of the krypton 86 atom. The length of the boa constrictor is 38 parrots and 1 parrot's wing, according to the famous cartoon. Atoms of chemical elements differ from each other in the number of protons in their nuclei, which determine the ordinal number of each of them in the periodic table of D.I. Mendeleev. Isotopes of one and the same element differ from each other by the number of neutrons in their nuclei, and it goes on. Whatever one pays attention to, numerical determinants will be revealed everywhere. Measure, either single or multiple, which is a statistics that allows one to distinguish pluralities from each other and single out subpluralities from pluralities. That is, scientists have been arguing since at least ancient Greece. What is primary, spirit or matter? Nothing is primary. Informational development cannot overtake material development, and material development cannot overtake informational development. If you don't know something, you won't act according to this knowledge, and vice versa. If you don't try something, you won't be convinced that you are right, because practice is the criterion of truth. This is reasoning at the level of behavior, and if we talk at the level of research, then basically scientists receive information through the study of matter, and vice versa, through some mathematical calculations. Guesses logically come to something, then it's investigated, established, and nothing can overtake. But everything is set with the help of measure. Measure is a certain givenness from above. In matter, measure is expressed as a matrix of possible states of matter. Matrix, this is in English, and in Russian this is mira, measure. In information, measure is expressed as an algorithm. An algorithm is a measure that is only expressed in information. The triunity works in everything, and the triunity is the basis of all magic. Physicists have now proven this in the 20th century. The basis of magic is the triunity. They proved it on the example of technical capabilities. They came to this. But according to physics, we have only 4 types of field interactions at the field level. Electromagnetic interaction, I'm already slowly moving on to magic because it's a serious thing. The second is gravitational interaction. The third is strong and weak. The last 2 are under investigation. This is basically all sorts of intranuclear interactions, that is, nuclear reactions and so on. But electromagnetic and gravitational, this is clear. Electromagnetic interaction, this is all practical technology that has electronics. Our phones, different types of electromagnetic interaction, it is studied now to the limit. And just at this time, at the present time, it is precisely the improvement of the development of electromagnetic interaction that determines technical progress. So we have new iPhones, stuff like that. Plus, in matter, of course, all sorts of crystals reduce, nanotechnologies. All this is electromagnetic interaction. Gravity has not been studied practically. They tried it, but it's not amenable to study. Only at the micro level it's amenable. And at the macro level, these are Newton's laws. And that's all. That is, no more types of interactions are generally recognized by materialist physicists. But if you and I think about each other, have you ever had this? You think about someone and they already call you on the phone. You just think and information is already transmitted. Or you think about someone and he comes to you. How is information transmitted? That is, there are other types of interactions, but they are not recognized by scientists because they cannot be measured. Although now even biofields are measured, there are devices for measuring the biofield. This is not a technical interaction. And these are technical types of interaction. There are measuring instruments. Just recently, literally 10 years ago, biofields began to be measured. Some people see them. At the technical level, scientists have proved that there exists a measure of predetermination. How did they prove it? They carried out experiments with light quanta and with an electron, already back in the 20s. I won't go into physics either. We have a separate book, so everything is written in detail, again on the same site. It may be considered the 7th book of Comparative Theology. There it is all detailed. At the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, scientists ran into a problem. Is light a particle or a wave? Someone probably went through this at school. Is light a particle or a wave? Well, as a result of experiments, they proved that it is both. Why? Such an experiment was carried out, an electron gun and a screen. And here there are two slits in front of the screen. You were shown this experiment at school. Electrons come here from the gun, and on the screen you get an interference pattern. An interference pattern. If these were particles, then there would be no interference pattern because only a wave can go around space. But the particles hitting the screen, here there are many particles, here it's empty, here there are many, here it's empty. Thus it was proved that light or electrons, which make up microparticles of light photons, light quanta, are both a particle and a wave at the same time. Already closer to the middle of the 20th century, Richard Feynman also worked. These experiments were carried out with slits and with other crystals. Here they spread further and with different screens. But it turned out to be both. The American physicist Richard Feynman, he already carried out the same experiment with an electron. Also two slits, a screen, and he got a picture. But he made a very interesting suggestion. I'll read the quote. He questioned the basic classical assumption that every electron goes through either the left slot or the right slot. At first glance, this assumption is so fundamental that it is absurd to doubt it. some electrons through this gap, some through this one. Then they exhibit the properties of a wave and a picture appears on the screen. If you take a source of waves on the water, two obstacles, send waves here, then a picture is obtained on the screen, now thickly, now empty. You probably, when swimming, have seen how the wave comes. The particle behaves in the same way. This dispute took place, but he went further. And if you look into the area between these slits and the phosphorescent screen, and see what kind of thing the electron passes through, you can do this, but thereby you change the experiment. To see the electron, you have to do something with it. For example, illuminate it, i.e. collide a photon with it. He suggested that each electron that passes through the barrier hits the phosphorescent screen, passes through both slits simultaneously. One particle passes through both slits simultaneously. At the same time, it can pass not only through both slots, it can go somewhere else. And according to the formulation, the particle moves from one point to another, moves simultaneously along all possible paths. Somewhere like this here. One and the same particle moves along all possible paths simultaneously. From an infinite number of possible trajectories of one electron, as a result, the trajectory can be chosen only from the outside, either by illuminating the electron, or one can somehow influence it from the outside. And if you don't interfere with this experiment, then the particle moves simultaneously along all possible paths, then hitting the screen. But not only that, on the screen it turns out such a picture, if you look from the side. I'll draw a projection. The probability of electrons hitting one or another area of the screen. Here it also goes in waves, like this. The probability of electrons hitting one or another part of the screen corresponds to the size of the hill where these electrons fall. Probabilistic pattern after the passage of the electrons through the slits.
So, what they taught us in school isn't really the way it is, and that our senses are playing tricks on us. You just gotta wonder, what is this reality that we find ourselves in? Quantum physics says it's all just waves of information. Do I believe that? I hope so. Yikes! And here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness, the infamous double-slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now, there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So, when we throw things, that is, matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So, they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits, and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one, and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. Physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. It was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange, never-world of quantum events. What is matter? Marbles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any of this? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
Not only does it pass along all possible trajectories, if you do not interfere with the experiment, it passes simultaneously along all possible trajectories through both slits, one particle, and even forms a probabilistic picture of a hit on the screen. This is a confirmation of the matrix of possible states, the matrix of possible paths. Scientists don't know where it comes from. In relation to the particle, it is given from above, and this is the picture of a matrix or measure. Most likely, where more, where less. Where it is empty, it cannot enter at all. That is, you can't go there. And this is a very important thing, the basis of any magic at the level of the microcosm. Here the electron cannot be seen, only through the microscope. If you have influenced this experiment, you yourself choose one path, and it goes along this path. If you do not impact on the experiment, the potential set from above, in this case,
заданный свыше,
is the whole set of paths that the particle goes through.
которая проходит частица. Основа
This is the basis of any magic.
То есть мы сами
That is,
выбираем.
we ourselves choose the path by exerting impact on the experiment. In the given case, at the technical level, how to impact.
Осветить электрон. Сразу какой-то
If you illuminate an electron,
Если
immediately
не
one path appears. If you don't illuminate, the potential is preserved. General scientists got stuck on the fact that there exists a matrix of possibilities. Its origin, why precisely such a picture, they can't explain this, because without God it cannot be explained. And the paths, this is where you can and where you cannot. In relation to human capabilities, there are many of them. For God, this is a certain limited matrix of possibilities. This is at the physical level. Such confirmation was already received in the 20th century. It was obtained in the first half of the 20th century. But there was no idea. This experiment is very famous. Richard Feynman. And later both Einstein and Planck agreed with him that the picture of possibility has a probabilistic character. So, such a thing. This confirms at the level of technical capabilities the conclusions made by our scientists and the information that was hidden by top-level governors who took on global responsibility. But they understood that magic can be done. A path is chosen when it's illuminated in some way, is illuminated here, and a certain path is chosen for everyone else. In this case, for an electron, it's at the micro level. But the micro level and the macro level are interconnected, because everything consists of electrons, quarks, atoms, molecules, and so forth. So there is such a thing. This is one of the confirmations of what we have today. Confirmation of the triunity. In principle, anything, it is this triunity. Matter, information, measure are inextricably linked. Why? Because God rules the world with the help of this triunity. And man has been given limited possibilities, limited by providence, of governing both the world and himself. Informational impact on each other, on some subjects of governance, is no less significant than material impact. Moreover, it is possible to exert both informational and material impact only according to the possibilities given from above, that is, according to God's providence. Space and time are particular measures of development. Moreover, it has been proven again by physicists. These categories contain everything else in themselves. Space and time are particular measures. That is, a measure contains both space and time. Energy is a variety of matter. Matter contains in itself energy. Everything else fits into these three objective categories and proven again by physicists. One example, energy, mc squared, E is equal to mc squared. Have you heard this formula? Energy and mass are connected with each other. Since they are interconnected, they are not in themselves something separate.
Энергия и масса связаны между собой. Раз они связаны между собой, то сами по себе они не являются уже чем-то отдельным.
But even here it is shown that mass is frozen energy, and Einstein even has such a concept. Matter is frozen energy. Well, this is really so, because whoever knows at least a little physics, then the transitional state of matter, for example, if from water to steam or from ice to water, energy is released and absorbed. Therefore, they fooled their heads for a very long time that matter and energy are the fundamental categories of creation. The same is true with space and time. You probably know that in the space industry, in space is measured by hours. How many hours you need to fly. And in this, space is measured. Distance. And in general, the concept of time, it is purely subjective, arises in the human psyche when comparing two different time standards. We now live according to the astronomical standard of time, which is set through space. On the other hand, it is reproduced with the help of vibrations there of some element of the periodic table, its excitation, and the astronomical standard is also reproduced. But I showed that when I gave the law of time, there is another standard of time, biological. This is the period of the reproduction of generations. They can also measure time. Previously, time was measured by dynasties, for example, kings. Despite the length of the reign of one or another king, history was written with the help of dynasties. That is, there are different time standards. When juxtaposing them, there arises in the psyche a sense of time. Well, even in the same Quran, it is said that for God, such a great amount of years is like one moment. God does not get tired of ruling the worlds. He does not rest, does not sleep, and never gets tired. For him, the period of life of civilization is like one moment. That is, time is not a fundamental category given from above in this sense, that time that we know anyway. There may be something objective, but this no longer concerns our world. It's also hard to fit, of course, in the head, but in any case, this is very simple. Information in and of itself is a separate category of creation. You can convey the same information write something on paper, send an SMS, the same information, a line, for example, to someone. You can call and say about it. That is, information does not depend on the material carrier. It is something that exists independently of the material carrier. But the material carrier is obligatory. It may be different. We will go further when the topic of our spiritual culture comes up. Then it will be needed there. Why do I give the triunity so completely? Because through the triunity, everything can be understood. It is impossible to understand everything through the four-unity. Therefore, scientists have become confused in quantum mechanics, in quantum physics. They are still searching for the God particle. They even give Nobel Prizes for it, but they won't find it. The Higgs particle being accelerated in the electron collider between France and Switzerland. And you can transfer information also in non-technical ways. That is, fields of interaction that I wrote. Electromagnetic field, this is matter that carries information. This is proven because we call each other. There are no wires. How does information get to us without wires? Through an electromagnetic field. If there exist, in addition to technical fields, other fields, then information can also be transmitted through them. This is also the basis of any magic. Magic is just the possibility of impacting on the subject of governance from the side of the object of governance. Well, in a way that is not accepted in society, which cannot be basically measured or somehow rationally explained. But magic exists.
Но магия существует, потому что воздействие
Because the informational impact at a distance or non-contact impact, it really exists. And this informational impact is transmitted through a certain type of matter, which is called either spirit or fields. In physics, it is called field. In some ancient cultures there, it was called communication with spirits, and so on. We will also go through this further when the topic is spiritual culture. Again, the triunity works because information is transmitted with the help of matter, and it is algorithmically enordered. If you pass some line, some text, then the text is a code. Language is a code. You encode information, you encode your thought, you pass this information with the help of the code, and the code is the measure. In addition to these three categories, no concepts are needed in the given case to explain how the information transfer mechanism works. Both this mechanism, the one that is accepted in society, that it exists through technical fields, and the information transfer mechanism, which in society is some mysticism. Mysticism, this is mystery, something hidden. What is in God's providence, this also can be seen in the sacred writings of many of them. All the founders of religious systems, basically we think so, if we study the sacred scriptures, their history, the history of the formation of the religions, the history of writing, how it can be reconstructed. Imagine for yourselves, they came into society with one thing. The main task, to liquidate such a structure of society. So here we have the eye, then the top elite, then the working elite, the crowd. To liquidate such a structure of society. Here on the $1, there is precisely this picture. Do one of you have a $1 bill? Precisely this picture with the eye. And it's written there, a new world order. This is the task of those global governors who have taken responsibility since ancient Egypt to maintain just such a system of social organization so that all incomes and opportunities go up. And here only the required number of people to survive. Now they have the golden billion. For them this is a lot. So, all the prophets came in order to liquidate such a structure of society, so that all people would be equal both in opportunities and in potential. And this nraviousness comes from above. This criterion of nraviousness is objectively set from above for society. Moreover, in the middle of the 20th century, the time came when this pyramid collapses itself. Why? This pyramid has always rested on another pyramid, inverted relative to it. This is the pyramid of power. This is power. This is the pyramid of knowledge. It is mainly of a governorial and scientific character. If we draw parallels like this, it has been historically proven. We even have such a concept in Russian as aristocracy or nobility. the estate of people in feudalism.
знать. То есть
That is,
сознание,
all knowledge, the maximum of knowledge, this is this I, the global world behind the scenes.
дальше.
Next, there are Jews.
Каббала не случайно.
It is no accident that Kabbalah was given to them.
Наука, где зашифровано. Знание
Kabbalah is a science where the knowledge that is intended for the Jews is encrypted.
и толпа.
Elite and crowd. The crowd has the least of all.
Ну и элита эти
Well,
посвящались
the elite was initiated in the early stages during the existence of Roman civilization. They were initiated in the houses of life in Egypt.
Ну, а толпа,
Well, the crowd, they were slaves, then peasants, serfs, and others. Then they were so-called released, but the knowledge remained here. Knowledge is information, information about society.
Вот после середины
Since the middle of the
20th
20th century, governorial knowledge began to be revealed.
Сейчас мы через
Now we mainly, through the internet,
через
through the informational revolution, as it is called, the informational boom, we have the opportunity to get any knowledge.
Раньше, то есть во времена еще
Earlier, back in the 19th century, the vast majority, more than 90%, were generally illiterate in the world.
Самая грамотная страна
The most literate country was ours.
во времена
In
товарища
the time of
Сталина
Comrade
были
Stalin,
даны возможности
opportunities were given for obtaining an equal education
всем, кто
to everyone
желает.
who only wishes, who is not lazy,
И люди стали
and people
образованы,
became
знания не
educated,
давались.
but knowledge was not given.
Была система
There was a
секретности,
system of secrecy and red, so to speak, censorship.
цензура. Сначала была христианская,
At first there was peasant censorship, church censorship.
получать знания.
It didn't allow to receive knowledge.
Была красная
And then everyone became literate. There was red censorship, Soviet censorship.
запрет
It did not
в
give.
1991 году. Все выплеснулось в сеть, все знания.
But when the ban was lifted in 1991, everything spilled out onto the net.
Одна
All
пирамида
knowledge.
власти, другая
But it just needs to be understood.
если эти знания
And
дать
it turns out, one pyramid of power, another pyramid of knowledge. If this knowledge is given here,
основной секрет.
it is now given, then that's it. The main secret.
Основной секрет.
You know, right?
Пирамида знаний пересекает
The
пирамиду.
pyramid of knowledge crosses the pyramid of power.
Элита
Now, many of the elite have no idea what I'm talking about.
того, о чем я вам говорю. Она
It is engaged in debauchery, as it always was, drinking and so on and so forth, but it just does not study.
а знание
And
дает
knowledge
власть.
gives power.
Поэтому
Therefore, the nobility,
аристократия
nobility has the root no, which denotes to know,
должна знать.
was the aristocracy, otherwise called the nobility, titled nobility.
По титулу
The power was from the fact that by birth, by noble bloodlines, according to the title, knowledge was given. It was given from here.
ну, исторически
Well, historically, unfortunately, it so happened that, first of all, it was given to the Jews
самому
as the means of seizing global power closest to the world behind the scenes. It all spilled out of Egypt. Everything is written in detail in the Old Testament.
все из Египта, и все подробно написано в Ветхом Завете. То есть
Now there are
сейчас
practically no
нет
obstacles.
никаких препятствий.
The pyramid of power is being destroyed due to the fact that the old principle does not work.
Старый принцип. Многие
Many global representatives of the periphery of the world behind the scenes
мировой закулисье в ужасе. Особенно
are horrified, especially Henry Kissinger,
который был
who was an advisor to several presidents of the United States.
он пишет,
He writes that people have become too politicized,
политизирован стал,
a political awakening. This is unacceptable for us.
неприемлемо. Почему?
Why?
Потому что
Because the
потеря
loss of power, no money.
какие деньги, если большинство
If most people
денег,
find out that the Federal Reserve is just printing green papers, backed by nothing, it'll just drop the dollar.
просто откажутся от доллара. Доллар
The dollar relies only on the fact that It has been promoted since the middle of the 20th century, and nothing else. America has debts comparable to several United States budgets. They simply print green paper and use it to buy timber, oil, food, including from us. Well, they wanted to do the same thing from the euro, but now there is competition between the euro and the dollar. This is a slightly different global European large clan. And if people find out that they are being fooled simply in many parameters, they will want to find the real criteria for good and evil. Then that's it, that's the end. And here, the main secret is this star. And then after that you can look for other secrets. Although it, of course, is a kind of harmony. In nature there are six-pointed things, snowflakes, for example. Therefore, from above, to all appearances, starting from the 10th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty in Egypt, if I have time I will tell the story in more detail, who for the first time expressed to the people, not for himself, the assumption that God is one. At the time there was polytheism in Egypt, that God is one, and generally reached the point that, this is the second half of the second millennium BCE in Egypt, that there was found in general a person representing higher powers, God, suggesting that social spravedlivost should be established in Egypt. This is more than 3,500 years ago. And almost legislatively tried to introduce public ownership of the means of production, what we had under socialism formerly. But it did not succeed then, because of the illiteracy of the population. But he did do a lot there. He called himself Akhenaten, and he introduced the cult of the supreme deity, Aton. And before that, there was the cult of Amun. Since then, these two lines have been practically at war with each other, in terms of information mainly. The cult of Amun is the preservation of the pyramid, and the cult of Aton, this is social spravedlivost. Then Moses appeared, after a very short time in Egypt, and said the same thing, came to Pharaoh and said, "You live wrong, you have to live differently." As a result, the mission of Moses was replaced, and in the Sinai desert, the Egyptian jretzes took up the education of the Jews, and Moses was removed from power. Well, after that, after 500 years, the first books of the Old Testament, the Deuteronomy of Moses, were written on his behalf, but he never said anything like that. In the period chronologically from the time of Moses, who himself professed monotheism and was faithful to God, according to the Quran, until the formation of Judaism, which the same Quran equated in meaning with polytheism, the teachings of Moses and those who were previous before him were replaced by a teaching that imitates faith in one God. And the Lord said to Moses, "I am gracious to them according to thy word, but I live, and my name is living. So the glory of the Lord shall fill all the earth. For all the men who see my glory, and the signs which I wrought in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tempted me this 10th time, and have not hearkened to my voice, surely they shall not see the land which I swear to their fathers. But their children which are with me here, as many as know not good or evil, every inexperienced youth, to them will I give the land. But none who have provoked me shall see it." The text in the square brackets has been restored according to the translation of the Septuagint, which is a version of events in the presentation of the owners of the then 3rd century BCE, canon of the Old Testament. Thus, it is possible to compare the meaning of 1423 before and after the restoration of the removals made for the benefit of the owners of the historically later than the Septuagint Christian canonical Bible, used by the Western churches and their missionaries. The exclusion from verse 1423 reports that only those who, at the time of the events described, do not know what is good and what is evil, and do not understand anything in life, will come out of the wilderness, as well as those who are yet to be born during the forthcoming period of adult extinction, who have their own idea of what is good and evil, and who see in life the meaning conditioned by their real nraviousness. And so it is in general with many prophets. A New Testament was also formed. Here Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy, I already told you, drew attention to this, that the Christianity of Jesus and the Christianity of the Church are two completely different things. I know that what I have to express now, precisely the fact that church faith, which was preached for centuries, and is still preached to millions of people under the name of Christianity, is nothing but a very vulgar Jewish sect having nothing in common with true Christianity, will sound to people who verbally profess the teaching of this sect not only unbelievable, but the pinnacle of the most appalling blasphemy. I cannot not say this because for people to take advantage of the great blago which the true Christian teaching gives us, we must first free ourselves from that incoherent, false, and most importantly deeply immoral teaching which has concealed from us the true Christian teaching. This teaching, which has hidden from us the teaching of Christ, is the teaching of Paul, expressed in his epistles, which became the basis of the church teaching. This teaching isn't only not the teaching of Christ, but is a teaching directly opposite to it. It is enough only to read the Gospels without paying in them any special heed to everything that carries the stamp of superstitious inserts made by writers, such as the miracle of Cana in Galilee, resurrections, healings, expulsion of demons, and the resurrection of Christ himself, but sticking to what is simple, clear, understandable, and internally connected by one and the same thought. And then read at least those recognized as the best epistles of Paul, to clearly see that complete disagreement, which cannot be avoided, between the worldwide eternal teaching of the simple holy man Jesus, with the practically temporary, local, obscure, convoluted, altisonant, and adapting to the existing evil teaching of Pharisee Paul. Just as the essence of the teaching of Christ, like everything truly great, is simple, clear, accessible to everyone, and can be expressed in a few words, man is the Son of God, so the essence of the teaching of Paul is artificial, obscure, and completely incomprehensible to any free from hypnosis person. The essence of the teaching of Christ consists in the fact that the true blago of man is in the fulfillment of the will of the Father. The will of the Father is in the unity of people. And therefore, the reward for fulfilling the will of the Father is the very fulfillment, the merging with the Father. The reward now is in the consciousness of unity with the will of the Father. This consciousness gives the highest joy and freedom. This can be achieved only by the raising in oneself of the Spirit, by the transferring of life into spiritual life. The essence of the teaching of Paul consists in the fact that the death of Christ and his resurrection saves people from their sins and cruel punishments intended by God for the present people for the sins of their forefathers. While the basis of the teaching of Christ is that the main and only duty of a person is the fulfillment of the will of God, that is, love for people, the only basis of the teaching of Paul is that the only duty of a person is to believe that Christ redeemed and redeems by his death the sins of the people. Just as, according to the teachings of Christ, the reward for transferring one's life into the spiritual essence of each person is the joyful freedom of this consciousness of union with God, so, according to the teachings of Paul, the reward of a Dobrius life is not here, but in the future, posthumous state. According to the teaching of Paul, it is necessary to live a Dobrius life, most importantly, in order to receive a reward for it there. With his usual illogicality, he says, as if to prove that there must be blagoriousness in this future life. If we do not debauch and deprive ourselves of the pleasure of doing beastlinesses here, and there is no reward in the future life, then we will be made fools of. Yes, The basis of the teaching of Christ, istina, the meaning, the purpose of life. The basis of the teaching of Paul, calculation and fantasy. Even more varied conclusions stem naturally from such different foundations. Where Christ says that people should not wait for rewards and punishments in the future, and should, like workers for a master, understand their purpose and fulfill it. The whole teaching of Paul is based on the fear of punishment and on the promises of rewards, ascension to heaven, or on the most immoral position that if you believe, then you will be delivered from sins. You are sinless. Jesus also said that there should be a community of equals. Basically, it was with this that he came. The same is true of the Prophet Muhammad. Amun is a slightly distorted Amen or Amen. That is, in reality, the world behind the scenes has laid some of its signs. And in all varieties of Christianity, when priests, as a rule, after reading some verses, say Amen or Amen, this is an oath of allegiance to this hierarchy, the crowd elite one. The crowd elite pyramid, this is when the elite, under the leadership of the highest snacherhood, basically global, well, if we are talking about global processes, exploits the rest of society and appropriates its product in general. The crowd is a collection of people who live according to traditions and who reason according to the authority of leaders and traditions. A crowd is a collection of people who live according to tradition and reason according to authority. V.G. Bielinsky. The main quality of the crowd is the unwillingness and inability to think independently and come to opinions that correspond to the real state of affairs and the directionality of the course of events. The so-called elite is also a crowd, but more informed in some matters than the common people. In a crowd elite society, partly a non-crowd are znachers, who can think independently and introduce, by hook or by crook, their opinion into the psyche of others under the guise of their own opinion, or under the guise of the opinion of impeccable authorities, whom they themselves have nurtured in order that their authoritative opinion would be accepted by the crowd. In this case, the term crowd people does not have such a specific meaning, but refers to the historically established community of people, against the background of which and in interaction with which the so-called historical personalities act. The commonality of tradition is a factor in social organization that rallies the crowd together and makes it possible to govern it through the authorities of tradition, the founding leader, the successor leaders, and faithful interpreters. Tradition can be deliberately and unintentionally distorted as much as one pleases in comparison with what was and is in life in reality. Reasoning according to authority, intellectual dependency, is the main quality of the crowd. It manifests the desire of the crowd to live by someone else's mind, and ready-made recipes that are handed out by the slipped-to-it authorities. The crowd does not want to solve its own problems with its own mind, to live like human beings, and, disappointed in some leaders, immediately begins to wait for new authoritative leaders. Thanks to its thoughtlessness, it follows the leader passionately, that is, irresponsibly, unquestioningly believing in the correctness of the leader. This gives rise to the thoughtless all-permissiveness of the crowd. The mafia, standing on the premeditated all-permissiveness, introducing the leader to the crowd and grazing him, in fact leads the crowd to follow the leader provocateur wherever it wants, even to the slaughter. Likewise, the crowd mindlessly participates in the social unification of labor, not being responsible for anything in it, even for their own private affairs. And authorities can be different. Well, until this pop culture appeared, television, there was basically one authority. Of course, it was priests and power in the 19th century. Well, some kind of patriarchal cult also could be an authority. And now there are many authorities. But this is a crowd, not a people. Therefore, the society is crowd elite. Again, since the logics of social behavior has changed, there seem to be more authorities, but it's impossible to bring everything together as it used to be. To bring the whole crowd together so that it worships or obeys one authority. Therefore, I say that the time of the hierarchs of various churches has passed. There will be no return to them taking power back under themselves. Society is now largely governed through authoritative opinion, entertainment, the mass media, and advertising. What is a worldview? We first considered God's providence, where everything comes from. Worldview is a system of obrazes, information. A system of subjective obrazes, ideas about life, or a subjective model of objective reality, which is formed in the human psyche. Again, a worldview is a system of subjective obrazes, ideas about life. A subjective model of objective reality which is formed in the psyche of a person. The system of images, the information that is inherent in our psyche, it determines the worldview. And it is algorithmically structured. If we talk about the psyche, then conditionally the material carrier is neural networks. Neurons of the cells of the brain and nervous system, plus fields. But we'll talk about fields later. That is, a worldview is a subjective picture of objective reality that is developed in the psyche of the person at the present time, from birth to the present. Now, if we take the worldview of the triunity and the worldview of the four-unity, then these are two different worldviews. One is false, the other is normal, which a person should have. In addition, the worldview itself is still divided. I-centric, I am the center of everything. That is, a worldview that comes from a person, from his understanding of life to others. I-centric worldview. That's what you learn for yourself, you carry it in life. Or otherwise, an egoistic worldview, ego-centered. This is overall. There is a worldview of triunity and four-unity. Triunity is correct, going from God. The four-unity is a self-concoction. It is from oneself. Here too, I-centric or egocentric worldview, when you prove to someone that you are right, sometimes even doubting it yourself, without referring to any sources. This is one of the signs of an I-centric, egocentric worldview. The second type is the God-centric worldview. The most complete God-centric worldview, its, so to speak, description, is given in the Quran. Act according to what, as you understand, comes from God. Everything else will be added to you in the best possible way. A lot of useful God-centric worldview is expressed in the Quran. But in the Bible there is almost none of this. There are some words of Jesus there, but there is much less there in the New Testament. It is greatly perverted there. There are two types of worldview. Naturally, this is correct. There are also varieties of worldview in another plane.
Мировоззрение в другой плоскости.
A kaleidoscopic worldview, and the second, a mosaic worldview. Has anyone held a kaleidoscope toy in their hands?
Калейдоскоп, игрушку.
This is such a pipe where the pieces of glass are multicolored.
Такая труба.
If you turn this pipe, the picture changes.
Если вы посмотрите в трубу,
So, a kaleidoscopic worldview, it is very dangerous. Your picture of the world today is like this. Then someone told you something, you received some facts, your picture of the world has changed.
вот калейдоскопическое мировоззрение, оно очень опасно.
Like in a kaleidoscope. If you turn it, the picture changes.
Потом какие-то факты, вам что-то кто-то рассказал, какие-то факты вы получили, у вас картина мира изменилась. Как в калейдоскопе. Если повернуть, картинка меняется. Это мировоззрение не
This worldview is wrong. You cannot be guided by it.
меняется,
If something changes, some kind of vision, radically, then you need to deal with your psyche.
своей психикой
This is also very short, it's detailed in textbooks.
расписано. А мозаичное мировоззрение...
A mosaic worldview is a mosaic when the picture of the world, like an image, from pieces, from facts, pieces of information, is complex. Well, there are some gaps.
фактиков, кусочков информации сложен весь. Ну и какие-то есть...
Mosaic worldview. When you get some information, the picture does not change, but is supplemented by the missing fragments.
Дополняется,
And so all life it can be supplemented.
как всю жизнь она может дополняться. Это мозаичное
The overall picture does not change, but this can only be with a God-centric worldview, in the triunity in general, in the easiest way, although there may be a mosaic picture in other cases.
Хотя может картина мозаичная быть и в других случаях. Вот у большинства нашей интеллигенции
The majority of our intelligentsia, the so-called, unfortunately, which Vladimir Ilyich Lenin called not the brain of the nation, but shit.
выражение его можно найти
Indeed, there is such an expression, it can be found on the internet.
мировоззрение.
They have a kaleidoscopic worldview. Through this, all sorts of revolutions are made very easily in our country. They first become disillusioned with the autocracy at the beginning of the 20th century. It is the intelligentsia which made the revolution, basically a locomotive.
Вот. Потом они
Then they became disillusioned with socialism. We started in 1991, Sobchak. This is purely from there.
это чисто вот оттуда. Ну и
Well, it's clear what kind of offspring Anatoly has.
профессора
A professor at St. Petersburg State University, Ksenia Sobchak,
Ксения Собчак, она
she propagandizes mass sex,
повальный секс,
other things for children in general, and so on and so forth. Bad things in general.
нехорошие вещи, в общем.
Dom 2 and so on. This, as they say, is the fruit at the biological level.
На биологическом уровне. Вот. И потом она разочаровалась в социализме.
Then it became disillusioned with socialism and decided that liberalism was needed. Where did they get all this from?
Всё это.
From another intelligentsia, from Europe.
Из Европы. Поэтому великий поэт русский, у него очень
Therefore, the great Russian poet, he has many interesting things in his verses.
сказал, что на
Chuchev Fyodor Ivanovich said about it, "It is no use, you will not understand them. The more liberal, the more base and cruel."
великая блудница.
All this baseness and cruelty comes from Europe. Europe is the great harlot. Civilization for them is a fetish, but inaccessible to them is its ideal. The idea of civilization is inaccessible to the intelligentsia. And now Putin spoke about civilization, about Russian civilization. Though you may bow before its citizens, you will never win Europe's recognition. In its eyes, you will always be not servants of enlightenment, but slaves without rights. This is how it's happening now. Our intelligentsia always drew knowledge, a standard, from somewhere else. But mostly it was from Europe. At first they spoke German, and then they even began to speak French. But in the 20th century it is English. They like to send their children to England, to London.
в Англию, в Лондон. Вот. А идея русской
And the idea of Russian civilization was inaccessible to them, and remains inaccessible.
цивилизации
And Russian civilization, This is a selfless, self-forgetful mirror of the world. We will talk about this later. There is such an expression, self-forgetful mirror of the world, where all peoples look, but we do not think about ourselves. Therefore, a selfless, self-forgetful mirror. We are always ahead of the whole planet. The socialist revolution was successful only in our country. We also accepted perestroika, but now we are already abandoning this, and so on and much more. We tried everything, but we set a certain standard for the future, and again ahead of the whole planet. This is expressed, among other things, in the popular recognition of the newly elected president. As a kind of opportunity to reject Western reforms. That is, the worldview is what determines our behavior in life. What kind of worldview? This is how we behave. What information is embedded? This is how we behave, guided by it. And varieties, who insists on his exclusivity in the sense of judgments, then if he is guided by information from above, then he can insist. And if not, then this is a big question, because religion is a connection. If there is a connection with God, then, yes, you can broadcast from yourself as a kind of proposal to society or truth. If there is no connection, then there exist two varieties of atheism, which we have already talked about. Even if you consider yourself a believer and there is no connection, well, then, as Jesus told someone, "Why do you follow me and call Lord, but do not do what I say?" There is such. You can consider yourself a believer as much as you like, but live not even according to these scriptures, to say nothing of living according to God. Just as most Christians do not know the New Testament, most Muslims have not read the Quran, but consider themselves believers. Well, how can that be? To say nothing of the fact that they have no connection with God, which is spoken of in the scriptures. That is, it is just a kind of ritual which is observed from day to day and on which a lot of time is spent. The second concept related to this is world understanding. World understanding is already a system of concepts that are formed in the human psyche, from birth to present. A simplified definition. It is based on a subjective picture of the world, based on a worldview. The system of concepts, of course, of a world understanding is much narrower than a worldview, because we understand less than we feel. We understand only some limited part of what is in our head. And on the basis of the system of concepts, it is we who make conscious actions. Unconscious, this is on the basis of all information, on the basis of the worldview. That is the system of concepts. This is also a certain system. It reflects the security system that a person either has or which is in him at some minimum just to survive. A security system should have such a set of concepts that it provides security in all cases without exception, not like survival. Therefore, it is necessary to constantly expand the system of concepts. As Kosma Prutkov said, some things are incomprehensible to us, not because our concepts are weak, but because these things are not included in the circle of our concepts. If we expand the range, the circle of concepts, and maybe next time we will have time to draw, then we are moving to the side according to our worldview. It is wrong for a person to be guided only by a worldview. A person should strive to understand a lot as much as possible. For this, a level of consciousness is given. Roughly speaking, if such analogies can be drawn, animals are guided only by their worldview, if this matter can be applied to animals. They have no understanding. Society is controlled through the concept. The process of governing society is carried out through the introduction of new concepts and the elimination of old ones. If we remove what leads to dobro and introduce what leads to evil, then society will move towards evil. If it is the other way around, then it is towards dobro. For the last 30-40 years, our rulers, mostly closed on the West, have been moving society towards evil, mainly through the mass media. New concepts are introduced, take as a minimum that very sexual revolution, a positive attitude towards all sorts of nasty things, and removing what is basically good. Now this picture needs to be changed. Well, there are a number of definitions. We will return to them next time. That's it for today. Until next time.
До следующего раза.